Okay. Thank you. It's after lunch, and you lost your break. So let's take a little tiny movement break together, because if you fall asleep during my talk, I will be sad. So let's all stand up together, if you will, entertain me. Let's reach our fingers high towards the sky. Open up wide. Pat your neighbor on the back. Pat your other neighbor on the other back. Give yourself a hug. Maybe think about some of the emotion that you're holding from the day, and let's, we might need a little growling. Get your claws out. And shake it out. And sit down and don't fall asleep. So, like a couple of the other speakers here, when I was invited to be here, I sent 3 emails that said some version of, "Are you sure? Like me? Do you have the right person? I don't own a company, I don't run a clinic, I don't even work in a clinic. But I have become a sort of an accidental advocate for the use of psychedelic-supported therapy in mental health care." So here I am, and what I thought I would do with our time this afternoon is tell you a little bit about my own story and the story of my family, and how I came to believe from the bottom of my toes to the top of my head that these kinds of interventions can be extraordinarily helpful to us. So this is quite a personal story. I want you to know I'm a trained researcher. I can do the numbers, but we've done quite a lot of that today, and so I think I want to lean into this part of change where story drives culture, as my friend Kelsey Ramsden said earlier. I'm a practicing clinical psychologist. I've been a researcher, as I said. So I come to this conversation from lots of different angles. But I grew up in an evangelical Christian household, which meant no drugs, no alcohol, no cards, no dancing. Like, you know, we're talking real strict. And so I didn't have any kind of an experience with this world until way into my adulthood. And that's why I feel like I'm late to the game, even though I think we all sort of know the game is still just beginning. I am here because of this individual. This is my brother, Dave. He died at the age of 33. He died by suicide. And he is like one of the over 700,000 people in the world who lose their lives in this way. And so this is the experience that has catalyzed me to be part of this story. Dave started drinking alcohol when he was a young teenager in what felt like a relatively normative way. You know, he'd go on a hike and have a beer. He'd play music with his high school buddies in the garage and have a couple drinks. And he went through his life seeming to be somebody who was joyful and loved others, received love. He spent his summers guiding as a river raft in Montana, and then his winters running a ski lift in Big Sky, Montana. So he would have loved Iceland, a place of such beauty and wildness that kind of opens the soul right up. A few years ago, our father was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, a very advanced form of cancer, and it was quite clear that he had very limited time to live. And for reasons that I may not ever understand, not as a psychologist, not as a theologian, not as a sister, our dad's diagnosis spun my brother into a level of chaos that ultimately ended his life. So his addiction got deep and powerful and strong and was accompanied by depression and anxiety and increased isolation. If you've been in a therapy room in any way, you know these stories. So my dad went to chemo, Dave went to rehab. My dad got more tumors, Dave had a relapse. they seemed to be intertwined, which is, of course, why some of the conversations that we're hearing around the use of psychedelics for end-of-life issues, I think, is incredibly important, because most of us are going to lose our parents. This isn't an extraordinary experience. This is part of what it means to be human, is to confront the loss and the grief of those that we love. But again, for some reason that I don't fully understand, that seemed beyond his capacity. And so we both sat with my father when he died. I laid in bed next to him when he took his last breath. My brother held his hand. And it was, for me, an incredibly sacred and important experience. But my brother felt very differently about it. And so within a few months, he was unable to find his footing, and we lost him. And so that takes me to a place that has been beyond words, has been beyond what I knew how to handle. Even though I have all the words, I've gone to all the good schools and passed all the tests and written all the papers. I'm a mental health professional. Shouldn't I know this territory? Incidentally, one of the things that my own work in this psychedelic world has done is been to rebirth in me an engagement with art, with movement, with modalities of healing that are beyond maybe what we talk about in our clinical training programs. And so I thought I would pause and share with you some of those kinds of experiences today, because one of the things that I think we're also desperate for in our conversations around healing is how we bring in our creativity, how we bring in movement, how we bring in our expressive part of self. And if you're familiar at all with anybody who writes music or does much in art, psychedelics are probably pretty helpful to that process too. So in my grief, in my transformation or finding myself in a place of such darkness beyond words, this is how I have come to express that experience. Grief, as I mentioned, grief is, of course, one of the universal experiences of being human. But we, if I could just broadly use the term, don't have really great ways of coping with grief. If you are in a Western industrialized capitalist society like I am as an American, you might bury your mother or your father on Sunday, and you're back in the boardroom on Tuesday. We don't have space or time for these deeper experiences that shape us, that unravel us and reshape us and transform us. So I have been very thoughtful and in many ways have come to be very critical of my own field, of the practice of psychotherapy, of mental health practice in general, because of my experience watching and walking alongside my brother through his years of treatment, ultimately unsuccessfully, and because of my own entrance into this place of deep grief and my need to heal and find wholeness in the face of such deep loss. And so there are a few things that have just been sort of glaring to me as I think about why we need this kind of innovation in the way that we do mental health care. And I know in many ways I'm preaching to the choir, but perhaps the basics are important to go over again and again a few times. So one of the things that I think is extraordinarily important that we are missing in our current systems of mental health delivery is speed. We need to move faster in our ability to care effectively for people who are in the depths of their own darkness and who are suffering. My brother was in treatment for roughly 2 years from the time that my dad got sick and he entered his first inpatient treatment for alcohol use disorder to the time that he died, in and out of treatment, in and out of treatment. As it stands now, if you are somebody who is experiencing depression and you think, whew, this is getting to be too much, I need some help. The time that it takes for you to make an appointment with your doctor, go in and do your screening, do all your intake paperwork, do all of the things that are required for you to even begin treatment. And then if you begin treatment from a classic or the sort of traditional psychiatric standpoint, you are going to probably end up with an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And best case scenario, from the time that you first take that medication to the time that you experience significant relief of your symptoms is 4 to 6 weeks. And that best case scenario, according to some studies, is only in place for about 25% of people who do have a very positive initial treatment response to the first dose and the first medicine. And so you see how the timeline is going out and out and out. So by the time that maybe you have a medication adjustment or you get started with a psychotherapist, it's months. And that's just from the time that you started treatment, not from the time that you started realizing that your depression was getting out of control. And just from a customer support standpoint, that feels pretty ridiculous. But it's what almost universally happens for those who are struggling to find some support and relief. And of course, there's strong evidence to support that psychedelic medicine can tighten that timeline considerably. That after even a single dose of psilocybin, people experience significant relief from their depression symptoms. And I do want to be careful and nuanced. I am not saying that these treatments are fast and easy, that they're like the McDonald's drive-thru of psychotherapy or mental health, because they're not. They're hard and they do deep work. But I do think that they offer the possibility of getting people to a new experience faster. Because the amount of time that people are spending in their own darkness without even a glimmer of a new experience is too long. And we're losing them to hopelessness, if nothing else. The next thing that I would say about why we need the medicine is that these modalities offer us the opportunity to integrate our full selves into healing. So once again, if you'll permit me to be a bit critical of the field of which I am a part, we have really segmented the human self into different boxes. So you go to your physician for something related to your body. You go to your psychiatrist for your depression meds. You go to your therapist for a conversation about thoughts or feelings or family dynamics. You go to your clergy or your spiritual leader for anything related to existential well-being or, I don't know, the quandary about God and the universe and what happens after we die, the big, big questions. And maybe you go to a yoga teacher, or you have other artistic practices that are part of helping you to be whole and well, but it's fragmented. It's all over the place. And I think that we have emphasized expertise and specialization, but in some ways forgotten wisdom. We're only all looking at one particular little piece of a human story. And it's very difficult for us as a medical and mental health care machine to integrate together in our ways of thinking about and supporting people who are ill. And so I think we've left people feeling quite disconnected. And if nothing else, the time burden that it takes to go to all of those different appointments and have relationships with all those different specialists is highly problematic for helping people move through to a place of healing and of joy. And what I find so interesting, compelling, exciting about some of the modalities that we're talking about today is that they are, by nature, integrative. So there's a biochemical intervention. Something's going into your body and it's doing stuff in your brain, for a highly technical explanation. But that happens alongside helpers, therapists, guides, sitters, supporters. It's relational, it's emotional, it's psychological. Perhaps, depending on the modality that you're working from, you are encouraged to bring your spirituality in, to build an altar, to use texts or readings or poems or music that has deep spiritual significance to you. And hopefully, if you are engaged in this practice in a way that's very thoughtful, that there's an integration element where you have weeks, months of thinking about how to bring that experience of talking to God, or meeting your ancestors, or some spiritual deep nature of what happens in a psychedelic experience. How do you bring that home to your Tuesday, where you're with your kids, you're driving your minivan, loading everybody up? So the integration process, which often involves journaling, writing, practicing physical expression or other kinds of movement, of restoring a full self. And all of that is part of one, maybe somewhat meandering, but one conversation. So we're acknowledging the chemistry of the body, the way the biological systems work. We're acknowledging the need for helpers, for others, for relationships, ideally for a community of people who are alongside us in this journey. And we're creating space for bringing these sort of spiritual, big healing elements into the details of our lives and having them have expression in some way. So I feel like that does much to argue against this sort of old school Descartes body dualism that we've held onto for so long within the medical and mental health systems. Finally, another reason, or the third reason, that I think we need the medicine, and this is a little bit picking up from where you left off, is a sense of not just treating symptoms, but of seeing human wholeness and human flourishing, and believing that part of the work that we're doing in the world as healers and as helpers is the restoration of joy, is meaning, is connection. It's not just symptom alleviation, but it's quality of life, and it's moving people toward or helping people to thrive in the kinds of ways and the kinds of activities that they most value and are most important to them. And this has been relatively absent from our conversations within mental health care. For example, one of the things that's sort of a known risk for using an SSRI, and again, I want to just sort of parenthetically acknowledge that these medicines have been very important and life-saving for lots of people. So I don't mean to disparage them, but I mean to say, yes, good start, and what can we do? How can we iterate? How can we move on to the next way of supporting people's well-being? We know that many of the medications that we've been using come with them a sense of indifference or restricted range of affect. So perhaps So if we think about an emotion sort of on a scale, we're bringing in the negative range, we're bringing in the depression, we're minimizing the depression, but also, in many cases, restricting the capacity for joy, for pleasure, for ecstasy, the things that in many ways make life kind of fun and worth living. So if we accept this narrowing range and we limit our full capacity of emotional expression, I don't know that that's a trade we want to keep making. And what I think is now possible is that we probably don't have to keep making that trade. We can help people work through the suffering of depression without narrowing their capacity for joy, for connection, for meaning. In fact, if you talk to people who have experienced psychedelic-supported therapy, these are the words that they use to describe it: connecting, relational, peaceful, deepening, experience of love, profound, eye-opening. So we are letting, or we're encouraging people to be in the full range of what it means to be human without sacrificing some of the very things that anchor us to this life, as difficult and as painful and as heartbreaking as it can be sometimes. As I have been in the midst of my own grief, it has been the community of grievers, been the conversations, been the connections that have helped me to feel less alone and less isolated. And those kinds of experiences are only possible if I have the capacity to be in relationship, if I have the capacity to talk and to reach out and to connect. So we can't just eliminate the negative and also accept that we can narrow that range. We have to be able to sort of allow people the ability to anchor into the things that most help them by restoring the capacity, or like allowing people to feel that joy. What we fear. When I'm using the word we, I'm using it in a lot of ways. I'm using it as a mental health professional myself. I'm using it as a patient. I'm using it as a bereaved family member. And I think that there are lots of things that do make us uncomfortable about psychedelic-supported therapy, or really embracing psychedelics as medicine. Of course, there's all the regulatory stuff and the legality and all of those things that are seemingly unsolvable problems that all of us kind of bang our heads against the wall a little bit. But in a deeper way, I think there are some things that we do fear when we are thinking about using psychedelics as medicine that's important to talk about for ourselves and for the people that we serve. One is that these interventions are an invitation to walk toward anguish, to walk toward our painful experiences, our traumas, and our griefs. Bill Richardson at Johns Hopkins talks about the term in and through, that when we are using psychedelic-supported psychotherapy, we're not numbing. We're not making the pain go away. We're walking right toward it with the hope and the courage that we will have a different interaction with it, that we will see or feel or believe differently about our pain once we've encountered it in a new way. But I think it's important to be honest about how aversive our culture is to experiencing, to facing, to sitting with. And so in our conversations publicly, in our public education, I think we have to get a little more comfortable with that, and to help people feel more courageous about what is sometimes a very intense and overwhelming experience that leads to healing, but is in and of itself a big shift about what we are typically doing when we're going to a doctor or a therapist and we're saying, help me take this away, it hurts, it sucks, I don't want to do it anymore. So what it feels like to have somebody say, I think I can help, but it's probably not going to be in the way that you think. It's not by taking away the hurt, at least not until we walk toward it together. Here's my visual storytelling interpretation of walking toward the anguish. This all happened at the same time for me. All of this loss, discovering psychedelics, for me, in my N of one, and this aerial practice. So be careful. If you use psychedelics, you just might join the circus. Which kind of leads me to my next point, is we fear globally, culturally, surrendering the illusion of control. Because when you engage these practices, you don't always know exactly where it's going to lead you. And sometimes, from a medical perspective, that makes us real uncomfortable. We want to know, the course of therapy, where we're going, what we're going to encounter, how we're going to handle it. But of course, that's not possible when we invoke consciousness, psyche, spirit. And when we really pull forward or invite in the inner healing intelligence, the space of dreams, who knows what terrain we'll find ourselves in? And so I think we have to, help people have informed consent about that. And once again, help people find these spaces of courage to go into unknown territory with the belief, with that hope and the idea that with the right support, there will be healing on the other side. There will be a new story on the other side. But we can't sit with someone, I can't sit with someone as a clinician and say, this is exactly what's going to happen. And when you are holding a lot of trauma and when you are living in a lot of grief, that is a very, very scary potentiality. So we don't really know how all of this will play out in the lives of individuals and in the collective. And one other thing that I think it's important to say is that when we enter this space, I think we are inviting a reinterpretation or a redefining of what medicine means. Because if medicine in the cultural vernacular means I take a pill, it helps me feel better, that's not what we're doing anymore. So if we're talking about psychedelics as medicine, then we are breaking down the silos of how we have traditionally organized ourselves as helpers. And so the physician now has to have some language of spirituality. The therapist has to be more comfortable in breath work and yoga and circus movement, who knows? But we're playing on teams now in a different way, and the silos aren't clear in the way that maybe we want them to be. And what I think that's going to mean for us as helpers, as healers, as those who are early adapters in this movement, is an uncomfortable amount of humility. And it's very difficult to have humility about what you know and what you don't know, while also trying to fight very hard to get this thing that you believe in done. So even in this phase of the process, we see the camps developing. We're research-driven, we're data-driven. We use this medicine, oh, we don't touch ketamine. I mean, it's already happening. I think we have to be careful as a movement to understand that if we want there to be significant change, there has to also be a lot of humility and a lot of gentleness in the way that we approach this work and the potential for it. I think one of the things that I will carry with me throughout the duration of my life is watching my brother struggle so much to find his footing in the treatment world and not feeling like I could do very much to help him. And it's a little bit haunting now knowing that there's so much that could have been done, potentially, within this realm of treatment. The psychedelics likely could have been very, very helpful to him. And the idea that it didn't have to end like this, and the research that suggests that psychedelic-supported psychotherapy is very effective at helping people who are holding suicidal thoughts and beliefs. And so that's my work to do in my healing, is to have spent my life developing into a helping professional and to have a front row seat to a story that ended badly, where I felt like I couldn't do anything to help. I don't live under the belief that if I'd only done this one thing, it would have been different. I know it's more complicated than that. But I also know that we need things to be different. Hundreds and thousands of people are dying by suicide. Hundreds and thousands of people are dying by overdose. Millions of people are impacted by these experiences. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know you wouldn't be here if you didn't already believe this. One last piece of circus art, and then we can have some questions and dialogue if you like. But this is the final piece of this 3-act play, and this is the piece of integration, the piece that I'll be about to show you. What I'm doing in this movement isn't any easier than the movement in the first 2 pieces, but I think you'll see in it a little more ease, a little more cohesion. And I think that's a nice sort of analogy for how we talk about or think about integration. You start with pain, you walk through an experience that undoes and redoes, puts you back together, I guess. And you do that by walking through, facing your anguish. And then something's rearranged on the inside, which doesn't mean that life is not painful and things aren't hard and you don't continue to have your own grief or difficulty or hard days. But somehow there's a little bit more ease inside. In my own experience of being able to use MDMA-supported psychotherapy for my grief, In one session, I returned to the moment of my father's death. A real moment, it happened in real memory. But as I returned to it under the support of the medicine, I didn't see it the way that I saw it when it was happening. When it was happening, I was very attuned to my father and what he needed in the last moments of his life as he was passing over, doing whatever was in my power to help him to be comfortable, to help him feel loved, and to help him feel release. And I was thinking about my mom, and I was thinking about my brother, and I was managing, because I'm the oldest daughter and I'm a psychologist, and that's just my role in the world. But in the medicine, I saw myself sort of like I was hovering above, as you do. I saw myself as a daughter, as a girl, losing her daddy. And in the medicine, this sense of deep empathy for this moment in my life, for myself in this moment in my life. And I don't have better language other than to tell you that it just softened the whole thing. And so the grief was present, my love for him was present, but it just felt not like a knife through my heart, but as something to carry, something that could be carried. Softer, more accessible, more tender. And so it kind of got refiled, right? Maybe before it was in the file of like terrible, terrible things. And then it got refiled into the file of sacred and important experiences. And so it stayed in that new file. And that's allowed me to work with it, to write about it, to move through it, because it made it more accessible. And if nothing else, that's what we're here for. That's what we're doing in this work. And this is now how it feels. Any thoughts? Any questions? Anything we should interact about? There's one in the back.
Hello, my name is Munir, and I work with Psychedelics in Denmark. You said that you got introduced to psychedelic medicines late in your later life, and I was curious about, maybe you could tell something about your first experience with it, what kind of medicine it was, and in the relation to your work with your brother and the sorrow.
Yeah, sure. It was actually the session that I alluded to was my first experience of psychedelics, where I reworked with the death of my father. So that was about 4 years ago. Yeah. I grew up in the 80s. Just say no, right? And I think that, yeah, the timing of that experience, it was shortly after my father died, and I'd been following the research. I'd sort of had my eye on what was happening. I had trained as a trauma psychologist and did a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Center for PTSD. So it was sort of around me, but just not directly in my face until I just had this experience of how broken the system was and was like, what else is out there? There's got to be something else. And so thankfully was able to have my own really wonderful supported therapy experiences.
Yeah, my name is Robert.
Can
this
you
is more
wave?
a comment.
I can't see you. Oh, hi.
Hi. This is more a comment than a question. It actually was a comment for Sergio, who was on stage before you, but I think it connects nicely with what you were saying. He was talking about terminology, how important it is how we talk about psychedelics. And he was talking about the meaning of it as mind manifesting. And I actually have a problem with that. First of all, I think it's a bad translation of psyche. The original Greek, it's more like soul, and the meaning is different from mind. I think the problem is that mind is much too small. I mean, what we experience is our being. You know, we experience ourselves as souls, eternal souls even. We experience our bodies in a new way, our communities. So to say that psychedelics only manifests the mind is, for me, much too small. And it also, I would like to take a small example. Let's say someone had a psychedelic experience where he or her talked to God. And you say, well, yeah, it was your mind. It's not just your mind. I mean, it's much more than that. So we make it too small when we talk about it only as a mind.
We do have a language problem, right? We're redefining a lot of things. Redefining maybe what we mean when we say medicine, but I will echo your experience that once we reintegrate what we're doing or what we're supporting people through in their healing journey, mind is too small because the body feels different. The spirit feels different. The relationships feel different. Everything feels different. So we need a word, I guess, for everything. But yeah, I will just echo and resonate and agree with our sort of language problem in how to include the fullness of what we mean when we are talking about what's possible with this work. Okay, thank you for your time.